Chapter 22. So this chapter is all on the respiratory system. So we'll be covering some stuff that we've kind of mentioned before, like with our cardiovascular stuff, but focusing on what the respiratory system does. So for this first section, we'll just kind of do an overview of all the different organs involved and start from the top. So we'll start with the nose. For our respiration, so this is our actual breathing. That's the function of the respiratory system, to be able to bring air in and exhale out our carbon dioxide, which is also going to have some oxygen and other stuff in there. But we have our gas exchange is kind of the point of the breathing, necessary for communication. So as I'm speaking now, air is coming through my vocal cords in order for me to speak. Of course, there's other stuff with the mouth and all that jazz, whatever. Olfaction, sense of smell. So whatever's in the air and you sniff it, that's what you're sniffing. So if you're sniffing poop, you're got poop in your nose now. And then lastly, dealing with acid-base balance. Now we'll focus more on this for our exam 9 material, but for acid-base balance, the levels of carbon dioxide in the blood are going to affect the pH of the body. So with our exchange of gases, when we get rid of carbon dioxide as we breathe out, that helps with reducing the acids that could be in the body. So we'll talk more about that. We'll mention it here. Get that carbonic acid equation going, and then we'll actually see that for the next 3 exams. Other functions of our respiratory system, so helping with our blood pressure being regulated, helping with pressures to move blood and lymph back towards the heart. Helping with blood filtration, since the small little capillaries around our air sacs are very tiny. So if any kind of clotting happens in your blood that's not needed, that can help to kind of break those up since they're forced through those tiny little blood vessels. And then again with pressure, helping to push out abdominal content. So as you're pooping, as you're giving birth, that increase of air into your chest, that increases the volume, that pushes down on your abdomen and helps you to push down. So the organs of our respiratory system, so again, we start at the top. We have our nose, so this area, our pharynx, our larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, so the branching into our lungs, and our air is going to stop in what's called alveoli. So those are the little air sacs where we actually have our gas exchange, and then you reverse the process to breathe out. So we have 2 zones in our respiratory system. We have the conducting zone where there's no gas exchange. Basically, we're getting air into the lungs. So that's our nose through our major bronchioles. And then the respiratory zone, that's where we actually have the gas exchange. So that's in our air sac. And then there's some smaller bronchioles where there's a thin enough space in between the air in those little tiny bronchioles and the blood vessels nearby where you actually can have a little bit of gas exchange. Another major section of the respiratory system, so sometimes when you go to the doctor, they have they say that you have a upper respiratory tract infection. So upper respiratory is considered the nose to the larynx, so here through this upper portion here. Lower respiratory tract, that is the trachea through the lungs. So let's start with the nose. So the functions of the nose is to warm, cleanse, and humidify the inhaled air. So the nasal mucosa, so that mucus epithelial layer on the inside of your nasal passages, it's warmer because it's roughly at body temperature, a little bit cooler. So that's going to help warm in the air that you bring in. It'll help clean it because some of that stuff that's in the air gets stuck in the mucus, and therefore that's less stuff going to your lungs. And then humidify it. So it is a mucous membrane, so that's all nice and wet, and that helps with humidifying the air so it doesn't dry out other features inside your respiratory system. It also works as a resonating chamber that amplifies the voice. So I'm about to close my nose off, and because I've closed my nose off and I don't have my nose working as a resonating chamber, I sound like this. So that is actually helpful so that we actually sound what we consider normal. So with all this airflow going through our nasal passages, at the bottom of our nasal passages, so the inferior nasal concha, there's a bunch of erectile tissue, so it'll fill with blood, that will close off your nasal passages roughly every 30 to 60 minutes. So that's going to prevent air from going through it, and therefore kind of give that area a break so you're not drying out your nose epithelium. So it kind of gives them a break, and you just got to switch to the other side of your nose for breathing, or just breathe through your mouth. So sometimes where you have, you might breathe in and then realize, wait, one of my nasal passages is closed off. It could be just from this. It might not necessarily be your allergies. So it switched from your right and left side. So again, just give each side a break every once in a while. So after the air passes through the nose, it leaves into the pharynx region. So this is an area in your throat that's shared with stuff that's coming in through the mouth. So the part that we're going to focus on for breathing is down here, the laryngopharynx. So as we're shifting toward our larynx region. And the important piece there is this little flappy part here. It's our epiglottis cartilage that helps with closing off our airway when we swallow. Okay, there we go. Okay, so in that section is your larynx, which is your voice box. So there's that cartilage that I just mentioned. It's actually in the back. So here's that hyoid bone that you learned about earlier. And then there's other cartilages. They help with keeping the structure of your voice box. So their job is to keep food and drink out of the airway. And one way that it does that is when you swallow, this epiglottis is going to fold over and block off this entrance into your trachea. And then the food should go back behind your epiglottis. And then there's other parts of your larynx that also will close off to help with that. So for example, your vocal cords will adduct, so they'll reduce the space in between them, and that also helps with keeping stuff out of your trachea. So another feature of your larynx is to help with your actual making of voice sounds. So this is where your voice box are. So we have folds that are on the inside of the larynx, and the ones that actually produce sound are the inferior vocal cords. So when air goes between them, that is how you actually make the sound. So something that you'll need for the respiratory and digestive lab exam, the opening between your vocal cords is called the glottis. So depending on if your vocal cords are abducted or adducted will determine whether you're able to produce sound. So when your cords are adducted, then you actually are able to produce sound. If they're abducted, then you're just breathing through. So they're nice and open and able to just air go in and out. So an easy way to remember this is when your vocal cords are adducted, you can add to the conversation, so you can actually say something. But not so when your vocal cords are abducted. So after your air has passed through your larynx, it goes down towards the lung using the trachea. So there's a bunch of cartilages that are the C-shaped cartilages that allow for structural support of your trachea. And that little gap in the back helps to allow for a little bit of give, just in case, you make a big swallow of food, so that can help it pass by without getting food stuck in your throat. Okay, so this should be somewhere on your study guide. If I'm gonna say it, know it. Okay, never mind. I must have removed it off of your study guide, but oh well, just to gross you out. So inside your trachea, on your epithelial layer, where you have all this goblet cells making mucus. So normally you have these cilia that are on top of your epithelial cells, and they actually are pushing the mucus towards the back of the throat. So they're going to go upward towards the back of your throat or your pharynx. And normally this is a very thin layer of mucus and you don't realize that you're swallowing mucus all day long. But if you're sick, that's when you get that nice thick mucus that all you have these other debris like dead neutrophils or other cellular debris from you fighting off an infection. So that's that thicker mucus, that's the one that you cough up. At the end of your trachea, it splits off, because you have two lungs, into two different directions for your right and left main bronchi, and that's going to lead you into the lungs. Now, these bronchi enter in the lungs as well as with so main bronchus is our, as in one, bronchi is plural. Thank you, Latin. Okay, blood vessel, your lymphatic vessels, as well as nerves, they all enter the lungs through a slit called the hilum. So that's the opening I should do it this way. That's the opening in the lung that allows for all of these essentially tubing and wiring to get into your lung. So other features of the lung, this isn't on your study guide, but I'm just going to tell you because you might need it later. So the base of the lung, in this case, actually where you would think the base would be, at the freaking bottom. So this is actually touching your diaphragm, and then the apex, ding dong, is at the top on this one. So you have two different surfaces on your lungs. You have your costal surfaces on the outside. So those are touching your ribs. So remember, your ribs, they are connected to your sternum using the costal cartilages. So similar naming. The mediastinal surface, so that is the area where the heart is. So the mediastinum. So that is the inner surface towards the heart. And what's not on here, but whatever, you need to know it anyway, on your left lung, because your heart is shifted over onto the left side of the heart of the chest a little bit, you have what's called your cardiac impression. So that is just kind of a little dent in your left lung because you're having to make room for the heart. So after your air splits off into your main bronchi, then it's like a tree formation where you're going into smaller and smaller branches in order to end at your alveoli, which are the little tiny air sacs that are at the end where you have your gas exchange. So I'm going to find that slide, maybe. Keep going. Okay, I'm going to actually say this just because I would have said this in, where that thing is, in the normal lecture. So part of our breathing mechanism is our lungs kind of act like a balloon. So you can put air in, but then if you just let go the opening of the balloon, the elasticity of the balloon, or in this case the lungs, actually helps to expel air or push air out the lung. So it's kind of like pushing and pulling on a rubber band. You inhale, you stretch out the rubber band, you exhale, you release. So that kind of helps with making sure you're getting out that carbon dioxide out of your body. Also branching with your, with your airways of getting into those air sacs, you do have, of course, your blood supply. So following those same branching so that you can get down into the last endpoint where you actually have your gas exchange. And that is the job of the alveoli. So that's the name of all these little air sacs. So this is just a close-up on one, where around these little air sacs you have capillary beds where you can actually have your gas exchange. So each of these little sacs are around the area called the atrium, and it's just a big bundle of them where you can have plenty of gas exchange. So this just provides with a lot of surface area for doing your gas exchange. So I'm going to mention this later when we talk about gas exchange, but what are we talking about? The connection between our alveolus, so our air sac area, and the capillaries where we're having the exchange portion, the lining between them, so between the epithelial cell and the alveolus, and the same different type of epithelial cell to make your capillary vessel, that's called your respiratory membrane. So that's the space that your oxygen and carbon dioxide have to cross in order to actually have your gas exchange. So you'll hear that term later. Okay, so I'm mentioning this because it is on your labeling. So earlier when we talked about the heart has the pericardium, which is its connective tissue membrane around the heart, protecting it from friction with the lungs, as well as protecting it from maybe an infection that is in your body. So with the lungs actually have two layers just like your heart. The visceral layers on the inside, touching the viscera, so the organs, and the parietal one is on the outside. So that's actually touching your rib cage, and that helps with, as well as the top or superior portion of the diaphragm. So that's going to help with your breathing. So it literally is attached to them. So when they essentially move out the way for breathing, so especially if you're forcing air in, your ribs, as they move out the way and allow for more space or more volume to be in the chest, when your diaphragm contracts and flattens and creates more volume and space in the chest, that's going to decrease your air pressure in your lungs, and so air is going to flow down its pressure gradient and into the lungs. So those layers of connective tissue, those membranes on the outside, actually help with the actual function of breathing. So again, this is showing the two layers, and then this pleural cavity, it's actually filled with fluid that is in between the two layers, so it helps the two layers essentially stick to each other. So that helps, that makes that connection so that when the outer parietal pleural expands because it's attached to either diaphragm or ribs, it also pulls on the visceral pleura. The visceral pleura is attached to your lungs, and so that's how it pulls open the lungs to increase their volume so that air can go down the pressure gradient. Okay, let's talk breathing. So dealing with our respiration, so what muscles are necessary, how the brain stem helps with this situation, pressure gradient, so we're moving air in and out the lungs, other little measurements for dealing with breathing. So some of that you will do for a Connect lab. I just forgot which one, because we just started this whole new set of labs, so I forgot which one that is. And just look at our normal breathing patterns, and there's certain labeling of the different volumes. So with our respiratory cycle, it's one complete inhalation, so our inspiration, so breathing in, and one complete expiration, so breathing out or exhaling. So we have two different types. We have quiet respiration, where you just normal breathing in and out. Forced respiration happens during, like, let's say exercise, where you're like, okay, I got to get oxygen into my body because my muscles are needing it to make ATP, and so you're like huffing and puffing. So again, the moving of air in and out, just like with blood, it has to deal with pressure gradient. So by changing the volume of the lungs, I can change the pressure in the lung, and air moves in or out. So the prime muscle that's going to do that job, so prime mover of respiration, is the diaphragm. So it's this kind of umbrella-shaped muscle, so that's the purple on the picture. And when it contracts, it's going to flatten. That's going to increase the volume in your chest, and therefore decreasing the pressure inside the lungs, causing air to move into the lungs because the air is going down their pressure gradient. When your diaphragm relaxes, so it's going to go back into its kind of more upward umbrella shape. So that's going to push on the lungs, decreasing their volume, therefore increasing the pressure, causing air to be expelled or leave the lungs because the air is going to go down its pressure gradient. So other muscles help with this, especially if you're like forcefully breathing, to, like, for example, maybe moving your ribs out the way, or just helping to open up your chest, increasing the volume in your thoracic area, and that helps with your breathing. Nope. So there's other muscles that help with this, and I'm going to skip them because you don't need to know them. Okay, so with your breathing, of course, we have our normal expiration. So this is our, Okay, so with our forced inspiration. It's like, no, I'm missing something. So that's where all these accessory muscles help to greatly expand the thoracic volume. Increase in volume causes a decrease in pressure, and that helps to move air down their down the pressure gradient. So helping you to make a nice deep breath. Exact opposite. So in order to get air out the lungs, you can, again, your lungs are elastic, so just like blowing up a balloon, you let it go, the elasticity of it's going to help move air out. So normally it's just a reflex of that, so just kind of that elasticity. But you can have what's called a forced expiration. So we have a bunch of different muscles, particularly chest, as well as even your rectus abdominis. So that's your six-pack muscles, helping to create increased pressure. So from the abdominal region, so your stomach region, as well as your thoracic or chest region, and that's going to push on your lungs, decreasing your lung volume, therefore increasing the air pressure inside the lung, so the air is going to go down its pressure gradient and out the body, so out into the regular air. And I think I'm going to stop here because this thing is at 20 minutes. Wow. Just so you know, there isn't a pacemaker cell for breathing. We don't really know what triggers it. There's some brain input, and then of course you have your moving of your skeletal muscles, and you can voluntarily breathe, like, control that, but we don't really know how that works yet. Okay, so this is just showing brain stem, so that's our very primitive brain that helps with breathing. So there's a signal from that, but we just don't know how this sucker works. Other pieces, ignore that. Okay, so I'm actually going to start here on the next one because it deals with other stuff later. See ya!